I don't like history to be politicized. In the Nehruvian period, there was a particular narrative that was promoted, and it was about, Hindu, Muslim syncretism.
The raiding of the Somnath Temple.
Weaponization is playing out in almost every day when it comes to, whether it's mosques being demolished or people being lynched. Playing the Hindutva card didn't really help the BJP.
When Indira Gandhi was in power.
I suppose there are parallels between what's happening now.
You've called it Indira Gandhi's hubris and not commitment to democracy, the reason behind her revoking emergency.
Well, she thought that revoking the emergency and restoring democracy people would forgive her for what she'd done. India was probably the most socialist country outside the Soviet bloc. By discrediting Nehru, they're also trying to discredit the Congress party.
The nationalist historians, they believe that the Vedic culture existed way before even the Harappan civilization.
They want to draw this continuous line to the past, to this glorious Hindu past. The optics of Mr. Modi going to Israel just before the war started is very bad.
Hello and welcome to Batkahi. So today we have someone who's an author, who's a historian, who's a former diplomat and has been writing on India for the past 4 decades. But surprisingly, he's not an Indian, he's an Australian. I'm talking about John Zubrzycki, and we'll talk about his books. We'll talk about his book, The Shortest in History of India. We'll talk a bit about Indian history as well. So let's get started. Welcome to our show, John.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure.
The pleasure is all ours. Okay, so first of all, I'd like to know your love for India. You're an Australian, and then for the past 40 years, more than 40 years, I guess, you've been writing and researching on India. I think you've done your PhD on that as well.
Yes.
So can you tell us something about your love for India, for Indian history?
Yeah, look, it started really when I had finished school, and like a lot of Australians did in those days, we took a year off or a couple of years off as a gap year, and I decided I would travel through Asia, which I did. You're talking about the late 70s, so in those days you could still go through Afghanistan and all those places. So I did the whole lot, the old overland route, as they used to call it. And of all the countries I visited, India was the one that interested me the most.
Okay.
Basically, I spent longer here than in any of the other countries, and I travelled fairly widely. One thing that I carried with me was something called the Murray's Handbook to India, Pakistan. I think they still called it Ceylon in those days, and Bangladesh. And this was more than a guidebook, more than a Lonely Planet. It was really like almost a book on Indian history, and it just had places in it which you still won't find in Lonely Planet. They were so, it was so detailed, they were so obscure. So I used this book to travel around India with, get to some very interesting places that tourists normally don't go to. So when I got back, it was obvious that I should study Indian history and Hindi, which I did at the Australian National University. And I was very fortunate that I had someone called Professor A.L. Basham as my teacher.
Okay.
And in those days, he was the foremost authority. He was an Englishman, but he was the foremost authority on early Indian history, really up until, say, the Gupta period. And it really went from there. I just tried to maneuver myself into positions that would give me the opportunity to live and work in India, which I did, firstly as a diplomat and then as a foreign correspondent. And I got back to Australia. I was in about the mid-2000s, so around 2005, 2006, I started writing my first book, which was The Last Nizam, and they've kept coming out since then. So... I regularly visit India as much as I can. Yeah.
So initially, while you were researching and while you were meeting other people, so were there not any language barriers that you had to face, and how did you navigate through those?
Well, I did 3 years of Hindi the Australian National University.
Okay.
My Hindi was never fluent, far from it, but it was enough to get me around, put it that way. So I could, talk to a taxi driver. I could ask for directions. I could, have a basic conversation, and that's important too, because I mean, there's a lot of English speakers in India, of course, but the further away you get from the main centres, the harder it is to find someone who can speak English.
True.
And if you do really want to get, into the heart of India, under the skin, if you like, you've got to. It's good to know some language, so that was good. I mean, but you could always find someone who was, who could translate something for you if you needed it.
True. Okay. Okay. So, your book, The Shortest History of India. So, when it actually comes to the history of India, it's very vast. It's very diverse. But then, when you wrote this book, you named it The Shortest History of India. So, why the shortest history?
Well, so the publisher for that book in Australia, Black Ink, has been putting out a whole series of shortest histories. Anything from the shortest history of China and Russia to, I think, the shortest history of democracy, the shortest history of music, I think they've done a shortest history of AI or something like that now. So these are both, and they've done very well. For instance, my book, The Shortest History of India, has been translated into about a dozen languages.
Okay.
As have most of their others. I'm not special in that sense, but it's obviously struck a chord for people who want something that's authoritative but still readable, easily digestible without skimming too much on the surface. They want something that's in depth, but they're not going to. You don't need to have prior knowledge of the subject necessarily to understand and appreciate it. So that's what they were aiming for. So I've got a shortest history of Delhi that's coming out in September.
Interesting. So the Indian history, it's very vast, it's very complex, and it's very, very layered. And the way historical facts and historical narratives are being discussed now, do you think that the kind of interpretation that is being done, it plays a huge role in shaping the political landscape of the place as well?
Oh, totally. I think that's seems to be the aim of the current government. I mean, you've got school curriculums which are being altered, and I think the Mughal period, at least in the NCERT curriculum, barely rates a mention, which is a shame, because it forms such an important part of Indian history. I mean, I can see why they want to get away from those narratives, which were pretty much which were almost colonial narratives that were imposed on India, that the Indian history fitted neatly into certain epochs, periods, and so on. But there's no. I don't really see the reason why that should be. I mean, India's culture is goes back thousands of years. You can start with the Indus Valley civilization, and you go through to the Mauryan Empire and the Guptas, and the various different kingdoms that ruled South India, the Vijayanagar kingdoms, and all of this things. I mean, there's enough there to that gives India an inherent strength, that to be able to accommodate these other facts, that there were invasions, and that yes, those invasions really, if you count the days of the Delhi Sultanate to the end of the British Raj, that's a period of 900 years, and but in that time you had much happening in different parts of the subcontinent, whether it was the Ahom kingdoms in the northeast, or some of the South Indian kingdoms that where the Mughal rules did not penetrate. So I don't like history to be politicized. It shouldn't be politicized.
It shouldn't be.
It definitely should not be weaponized as well. I mean, not just politicized, but weaponized, and that is which saddens me as a historian.
We'll come to that. We'll talk about that as well. How history is being weaponized now. But good that you brought up the textbook part. So, like I previously said that it's the Indian history. It's very complex. It's
It's
very
very
layered.
complex. Yeah.
And sometimes what happens is when over the years, when people talk about certain events, certain historical events, most of those narratives are shaped based on the kind of ideology the individual has. So that do you not think that it kind of amplifies the problem that already exists, that it's already very layered, it's already very complex, and sort of it becomes very difficult to judge that which narrative is actually most accurate one, if not the only accurate narrative. So what would you like to say on that?
Well, that goes back to, I guess, the whole question of how objective how objective can a historian be, really. I mean, you can cherry pick facts and come up with your own narratives, and sometimes we don't have enough information to really draw a conclusion as to what happened in a particular period. Look, India's not the only country where this happens. I mean, it happened in Australia as well. I mean, we knew very little about, well, the way Aboriginal history was, the history of our Indigenous people was portrayed. Still in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. It was only later on when Aboriginal people got the vote, and there was a recognition of their contribution to the Australian, that acknowledgement that before the white people arrived in Australia as settlers and basically took over the country, there was this rich history that went back 60,000 years. India is not unique in that regard, but. Look, you'll always have conflicting narratives. I'm certainly not the sort of person who believes that we should cancel those people who hold views that we don't agree with or that we oppose or even that we find abhorrent. Let's debate them, let's have a proper contest of ideas. Let's debate these things openly. And I think in most cases, reason and objectivity will win out. So, I hope that contest of ideas, I think it's not really playing out as much as it could be in India. But I can see where these things are coming from. I mean, there was, in the Nehruvian period, there was a particular narrative that was promoted, and it was about Hindu, Muslim syncretism and so on. It's gone now almost the opposite way.
Exactly.
But there's a middle point there, which I think can be found. It just gets lost in all the noise that's surrounding it. Yeah.
True.
Yeah. But I can see how what's happening now is a reaction to that, to that sort of ideas that were being bandied around in the Nehruvian, particularly Nehruvian period.
Yeah, and in fact, Nehru was a firm believer in the fact that Indian culture cannot be just be said that it's Hindu culture. It's not a Hindutva culture. Exactly. India has many cultures, many languages, many religions, and like you just said, that things are going the opposite way of how they should have gone and how things were a few years ago. It's kind of a little sad now. And one such incident, like you said, that history should not be politicized. You just mentioned it, but people still do use it. They do that. They weaponize historical narratives to suit their own narratives, to suit their own propaganda, to suit their own agenda. One such incident, if I have to point just one right now, so it's the raiding of the Somnath Temple. So you've talked about that in your book as well. And so that particular incident has been brought up time and time again. So initially, I think Lord Ellenborough, he brought it up to, portray that Britishers were a savior of Hindus, and then they were going to return the respect that the Hindus had lost when the temple was raided. Later on, L.K. Advani, he also used the same sort of narrative, and he started his Rath Yatra from Somnath, which sadly eventually led to the demolition of the Babri Masjid. Now this is a very, and if you look at the current political scenario and landscape of India, again the same narrative is being used as, something to weaponize one particular community. So what would you say on that?
That's it really pains me to see that happening. It's totally unnecessary. It's totally unnecessary. The fact that India had, an uninterrupted period of mostly Muslim rule from, say, the 12th century to, maybe the beginning of the 19th, is nothing to be ashamed of. I mean, it added immensely to the richness of Indian culture. I mean, the fact that, rulers like Akbar and Jahangir ordered the translation of texts such as the Mahabharata and the Ramayana into Persian, and it was from those translated texts that they came to attention to the West, for instance.
True.
So it's it's and I mean that weaponization is playing out in almost every day when it comes to whether it's mosques being demolished or people being lynched or discrimination at a very basic level against not just Muslims but also Christians and other minorities. So this is something which unfortunately there's no push. You don't sense that there's a pushback from up on high. That there's not a condemnation. In Australia, no, we're not a perfect country by any means, but racial vilification laws are very strict, and they've been tightened considerably after the Bondi terrorist attack in December last year, and that's a good thing. I mean, it does. You do run into against racial vilification, running up against the right to free speech, and it's a complex area, But you're not getting that pushback really. I mean, yes, there are voices opposed to it and that are wanting to call the government out about it, but there's not that pushback that you'd get. Whereas in Australia, believe me, if there's something like that happens, you get a lot of pushback, and the debate's very vigorous, and it's a necessary thing in any democracy that there be that sort of discussion. Yeah.
I think one big problem why that is happening is because the people are not ready to question the people in authority. And once that stops, I think things start to go downhill from there onwards. And that is something I think is kind of happening in India right now. People are not questioning the people who are in authority, which should happen.
Yeah.
And just to add on to that, the line between being historically accurate and then those narratives being driven by one particular ideology, it's fading with time. Now, do you think or do you see it changing over the years? Because right now the current state of affairs is not very good, if I can say so.
Look, India is still a democracy, and politicians are still held to account.
Most of them, not all.
Most of them, yeah. But in the last election, everybody expected the BJP to win for landslide and to increase its majority considerably, and now they're forced into a coalition government. And I personally think that it's sort of shattered that myth of invincibility, but it also has highlighted that the real problems that really need to be addressed, that should be concentrated on things like full, employment. I think is one of the key things. I mean, rural unemployment is huge. Unemployment, labour participation for women in India is one among the lowest in the world, and you can include countries in sub-Saharan Africa in that table. A lack of opportunities. I mean, it's extraordinary that unemployment rates are higher among university graduates than they are among high school leavers, and rising levels of inequality as well. I mean, astonishing. Caste discrimination still continuing. All these sorts of things are problems which need addressing. So playing the Hindutva card didn't really help the BJP in this election. Didn't seem that way. I mean, you only have to look at the results out of Uttar Pradesh and even out of Ayodhya itself that this didn't work. Yeah, I don't know. Time will tell. It's as to what will happen. But I think that in Indian voters are savvy, and thank God that they do exercise that their democratic rights, and they do hold governments to account. And yeah.
Okay, so with how the textbooks and the syllabus is changing, and then people have actually stopped questioning. I think that is something that is being suppressed now. A very similar situation was there when Indira Gandhi was in power. So if you talk about the time period in which she was ruling, so that scenario, I think, or would you agree to it, that it's a little similar to how things are right now, in the sense that even then, before the emergency was imposed, any person who would question them, they would just put them behind bars. The same is happening right now. But do you agree with that?
Look, honestly, I guess even when I'm mentioning Indira Gandhi's rule in the book, I'm talking more about the license Raj, nationalisation, abolition of the privy purses, briefcase politics, corruption, that sort of stuff, which started to seep into the Congress. I mean, simply had been in power too long, I think, and that was one of the reasons why all that was happening, the factionalism. So I'm not really on top of those. I'm sure that that did happen, putting people who disagreed with you behind bars. And I know, if you were a trade unionist or something like that, then that would probably happen to you. So if you were in, yeah. That was also a period of tremendous. There was a lot of political unrest as well. There was the Naxalite movement in West Bengal was happening. But yeah, so I guess, I suppose there are parallels between what's happening now, but I don't see them as quite the same. Okay. Only because I'm haven't really delved into that part of Indira Gandhi's rule, that aspect of it. But certainly, it's the emergency itself was shocking.
Yeah, and you've talked about emergency in your book as well. Yeah. And you've also, there's a very interesting statement that you've made, that you've called it Indira Gandhi's hubris and not commitment to democracy, the reason behind her revoking emergency.
Yes.
So what led you to that conclusion?
Well, she thought that revoking the emergency and restoring democracy people would forgive her for what she'd done. Okay, basically, and that somehow she thought that, as was, I was actually in India then. Oh. I remember, just when it was being revoked, but I can still remember, that was my very first trip to India, so it was in 1977. Seeing, traveling by trains and seeing the slogans everywhere, and I think she had 10 points or something that, were being repeated. But, the fact that, boasting that the trains ran on time and things like that. So I think she thought that, yes, people had to pay a price for the emergency. There were journalists and politicians were arrested. There were the sterilisation campaigns and the slum clearances as well, that her son, particularly Sanjay
Gandhi,
was doing. But I think that she thought that people, by and large, kind of, accepted that it was necessary, and that she wouldn't suffer this backlash that she did. Yeah. So that's, again, it's a perfect example of how savvy the Indian voter was, and not willing to swallow that propaganda that she was putting out. So that was her hubris, that she thought that she would still enjoy the support of the people, and who'd appreciate the fact that she was restoring democracy, but in fact that was not the case. Yeah.
Okay, so before we go ahead, I'll bring back Nehru once again. I just wanted to know your opinions on how Nehru is being treated now. Like, everything that he's done for the
Yes.
country, it's being discredited now. Like,
Yes.
he's being vilified. Everybody
Yes.
is talking about how
Yes.
he was not a good person,
Yeah.
because I think that's how people have started to bifurcate people,
Yeah.
in good and bad. So,
Yeah. And elevating Vallabhbhai Patel at the same time. Yeah.
true.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, I think that when I might be wrong, but I think it was when Modi gave his address on the 75th anniversary of India's independence. I don't think Nehru got a mention at all. And even Mahatma Gandhi, although he is the father of the nation, it's more sort of tokenistic acknowledgement now, rather than also elevating him to the heights that he was at before. Yes, look, Nehru was certainly, India was probably the most socialist country outside the Soviet bloc, and that sticking to that. To these 5-year plans, and the planned economy, and the strict controls on business, unless you're one of the existing big business houses who did benefit from that, certainly held India back. And I think I mentioned in the book that if Patel had been Prime Minister instead of Nehru, India would have probably gone on a much more free market route, and it probably would have done much better if it had a more open economy, and taken the same route that a lot of the Southeast Asian and East Asian countries had taken. But well, look, again, I guess it's weaponizing history. It's by discrediting Nehru, they're also trying to discredit the Congress party, because this is, after all, a family dynasty, and Rahul Gandhi is just the latest in that line. But yeah, I mean, but then if it hadn't been for Nehru, India probably would have achieved its independence at some point. I mean, it was, the war had ended, Britain was broke, there was an anti-colonial movement spreading across the world. I mean, I think that they were just, wanting to wash their hands of things, whether there'd been 40, 50, 60 years of national struggle preceding that actual event. But certainly Nehru came into power with these very strong notions of secularism and democracy, and wanting to have a very a constitution that guaranteed fundamental rights and all of this. I mean, that's all to his credit. So he shouldn't be demoted as he has been.
Okay, so another thing that I'd like to talk to you about would be the Aryan migration theory. You've talked about that in your book as well. Now, there's a lot of debate that goes on around that as well. So, DNA evidence suggests that the Vedic culture, it came after a certain, section of people, they migrated to this region. Now, right now, currently, the nationalist historians, they do not agree to this opinion. They believe that the Vedic culture existed way before even the Harappan civilization. Now, this claim is not backed by any evidence as well. So, what's the fiasco about?
Well, it's like, it's the same thing that's happening. Take Delhi, for instance. It's people say that it's the site of Indraprashta was there, and that they've been digging under the Purana Kila around that area, looking for evidence that there was this great mythological city was built on this site. And so far, they're still digging there, but all they've found is some pottery shards, which basically turn the clock back to about the 1000 BCE. So they've got a long way to go, and there's still no evidence of anything suggesting that there was that this was the capital. But they want to draw this continuous line to the past, to this glorious Hindu past. Again, partly to negate the fact that Delhi is essentially a Muslim city, because although there were the Tomar Rajputs were there in Lalkot before rulers of the Delhi Sultanate arrived, but there's not much evidence of anything happening in Delhi at all. I mean, there's an Ashokan inscription that was found in GK, and there's evidence that it was a city of some importance in the during the Mauryan period. But you don't hear Delhi mentioned in any of the accounts of some of the early pilgrims that came, like the Buddhist pilgrims that came from China and coming into India. Delhi doesn't rate a mention. But if they could draw this line to this glorious Hindu past, it would give Delhi a bit more of a, I guess, restore it to its rightful place as the capital of India with this Hindu progeny there. So yes, the same thing is happening as far as the Indus Valley civilization's been concerned. But I mean, I think the evidence that this Vedic culture preceded the Indus Valley culture, or that it was indigenous, that it was here before any of that happened. I think that the evidence is going to keep pointing in the other direction. Yeah, our methods for analysing this sort of evidence as perhaps more archaeological discoveries come to light, then I think that whole theory will become increasingly discredited.
So it has become a little difficult to research in India now.
It has, yeah. It's harder for scholars. I mean, I'm not attached to university, but if I was and I wanted a research scholar, it's a very long process, which is a shame because I think academic exchange is important. Indian historians, unmatched in their ability to understand their culture and to dig deeper. Their knowledge of language and history and everything is unparalleled. But civil servants attached to the East India Company who did come up with the Aryan migration theory being one of them, the Indo-European languages, translations of some of these texts such as the Mahabharata and Bhagavad Gita into English, the work of people like Max Weber on Indian society, Louis de Montt on caste. I mean, now a lot of those, people might think that some of that scholarship's a bit outdated, and it probably justifiably so, because it was written at a certain time for a certain parameter. But, it laid the foundation for further scholarship and further research, so it's a good thing. But at the same time, you've got, I write narrative histories, and now there's some very good Indians writing excellent narrative histories. Yeah, it's a good thing because it just means that history becomes more accessible, and I think there's some justification also for saying that previously a lot of that in-depth scholarship on Indian history remained, cocooned inside university libraries and faculties rather than really being able to reach out to the wider public to enable them to get an appreciation for their own country's history. That's changing, and that's fantastic.
Okay.
But the work that those people do, people who write their PhDs, who are teaching Indian history in universities, who are doing that deep, hard research, that's, for me, I depend on them. Because I'm not sometimes I'm not in a position to do that. You could call the shortest history of India a derivative history because it derives from already published sources, like 90%. I don't think there's any archival research in that at all because everything I'm putting in there is a condensed version of what's been written before. I'm hopefully taking the most accurate, informed, and objective parts of that of them, what's been done before. But there's almost all my other books have been depended a lot on archival sources and so on. So if you stop giving foreign scholars access to those sources, it's a shame. It's a detriment to the further study of Indian history. And I mean, India has got tremendous soft power. It's, we all love our Indian food, our Bollywood music, the fact that the diaspora is spread far and wide, and these are skilled people with good English normally, and rising to the top of institutions, even entering politics in Australia. We've got several Indian. We've actually got two politicians who have Goanese heritage. So there you go. I didn't know that until I heard that from someone in Bombay when I was there a few days ago. But certainly it's good that that's happening. And so India, if it really wants to promote that soft power, it's good to have, you need to be open.
Yeah, true.
And
okay, so from what I gathered, from what you just said, as a researcher, so there are, I think, mainly two aspects of it. One is firstly getting the permission to research and study here as a foreigner. Then second one is finding objective resources for your study. Like you said, your book is heavily based on other published sources. So now, since again the narrative is being driven into two different sects, so with that happening, how difficult has it become for a researcher to actually find out good objective sources and research on it, so that their research itself is not biased in any angle?
Yeah, look, for starters, I'd say 90% of these archival sources would be in Hindi, Urdu, Persian, any of dozens of regional languages. Okay, some of that material has been translated into English, but just a microscopic fraction. So I don't pretend that I've deliberately stayed away from areas where I'd be dependent on that sort of material. So my sources tend to be English language sources. Sometimes I can get some stuff translated into English. It's probably getting easier these days with translation apps, etc. But still, look, the closer you can get to a primary source, hopefully the more objective your output can be. But then you've also got to take into account whether these, the person, so let's pretend that the British resident of Hyderabad just had an interview with Osman Ali Khan, the seventh Nizam, and went away scratching his head going, he's a bit eccentric, and he was wearing old pajamas and a dandruff encrusted fez, and what he served me was a cup of tea and a biscuit, and wouldn't even offer me a cigarette or something like that. So you read his report and you think, oh, this is an eccentric old man who's past his use by date and has got nothing ready to contribute. But we all know that he in fact was a very wily, quite pragmatic ruler. Maybe not so pragmatic when it came to his Declaration of Independence and the events leading up to the police action. But so you got to go, okay, well, we know that William Burton, who was the resident then, he was old school British, political, from the Indian political service, and he would have thought this way because he's not broad-minded, and he's probably just picked up what his predecessor had said, and he hasn't actually looked into it. So you got to you've got to try and read between the lines, if you like. It's very hard. It's very hard. But you just try and dig and dig and dig as much as possible, and try and come to some sort of
conclusion.
Yeah,
objective conclusion.
Yeah, be as objective as you can. Yeah, yeah, because then there might be a source from one of his own prime ministers, say, who'd. And he had some very good ones as well, but who'd give a different version of events, or might have reported that meeting in a different way. So it's not always there. files go missing, and particularly if you're at the National Archives of India, sometimes they're damaged, sometimes they're missing, sometimes they just seem to disappear into the ether. But having said that, the one good thing is that the National Archives of India is actually digitizing a lot of its material. So that makes it much easier for me, even sitting in Australia, to log in and look for material, which is great, which is better than we're doing with our archives, or even the British Library is doing with its, although I'm sure it's probably got so much more. It's such a big task. So there is, but then you try and do what you can, and then people have pulled me up and said, "No, you got this wrong," and what about so and so, and
then you dig deeper.
And well, that's all good. You're glad somebody's reading it. You say glad somebody's reading it closely, and and sometimes people will actually say, well, look, you should look at this as well, and it's maybe not necessarily always just pointing out your errors, but also pointing out where further fields for research as well, and that's good. And I would have to say that one like an area like the Princely States. When I wrote my book on the Last Nizam, which was also essentially a history of Hyderabad, going up until what was then the present day, but it's nearly 20 years old now. There have been several it was like really the first book that had come out that really looked at a particular princely state like that, or a ruling family. And since then there's been several quite good books have come out on the princely states. So that's good to see. People think of them as being debauched, despotic, and decadent, but in fact that they were very, they played a very important role. And there were some very good rulers among them. Very progressive, and those states were like an incubator for talent as well, because people could join, become the finance minister in Hyderabad and rise up through the ranks, and do much better than they could in British India at the same time. So these were they should not be written off, and they, of course, a third of the population and 2/5 of the landmass of India were covered by these states. So I'm just giving you that as an example. I know I digress because you were just asking about objectivity in history, but it's something good. And again, you get, I think you don't, I think people once would tend to dismiss these rulers as being nothing but polo playing playboys and so on. But there's they were. I think it was Savarkar who actually said that these states are the purest, the purest form of India's ancient past. So they were his words. It's not the exact quote, but that's what he was saying. And even Gandhi admired some of the rulers and thought that a princely state in its purest form was actually a good model for India to follow. An enlightened ruler, if there were and some of them were. So, of course, that's not how other nationalists thought of them, but it's so it's interesting. So we just need to be open-minded, objective, and as objective as we can, but above all, open-minded, in your approach to things, and that's where you'll get good, interesting scholarship, hopefully further debate and so on.
True. Agreed. Okay, so one more thing. We'll just end this conversation, by talking about where India stands as a global power currently. Since, and I'll just draw a comparison again. So it took us a lot of time, almost 200 years to get rid of the Britishers to gain our independence, and we had to pay a huge price for that as well. But then we gained an autonomous, we gained an autonomy, and we were heading somewhere. Now, if we look at the current political scenario and where India stands right now, so what has happened is that India, again, I think is losing its autonomy a little bit. That we rely a lot on pleasing one particular president, one particular nation, and we want to be in their good books, or our prime minister wants to be in their good books. So, do you not think that India is actually heading backwards instead of progressing?
It's a hard one, and I think it's become harder to answer that question given the events of even just the last few weeks with the war in the Middle East. Look, this is no longer a bipolar world; it's a multipolar world, and India's tried to, I think, adjust its foreign policy to accommodate that reality. Yes, I think it hitched its wagon a little bit too closely to the Americans and got burnt in the process. But look, I think Jaishankar is a smart guy. I think he's, by and large, he's probably been a very good foreign minister when it comes to negotiating these very troubled waters that we all find ourselves in. Yeah, look, I know, the optics of Mr. Modi going to Israel just before the war started is very bad. His silence on what's been happening there, not a total silence, but generally there's not the sort of condemnation that, he hasn't condemned the war, but, then again, I think of Australia and our own Prime Minister, within probably 28 or 48 hours after the war began, coming out, in support of it and endorsing its what seemed at that time to be the aims of the war, and 2 weeks down the track we find out that there is no aim actually. No one can actually pinpoint an aim. I mean, all the aims keep changing. So I think even you look at Australia, and we've also hitched our wagon very closely to America, and one of the first nations to come up with that support. But now we look at, if you look back at that statement, I'd say we'd be quite embarrassed by it, or should be anyway. Well, it doesn't seem to have been picked up by the Australian media for some reason. So yes, there might be a good reason why. I mean, it's. I think I was reading, there was a piece in one of the papers today or yesterday. India's rich Persian heritage. I mean, Persian was spoken, it was the lingua franca of Delhi and much of North India, not just in the courts, but among the merchant classes, and poetry was composed in Persian and things like that. And India's links with Iran, with Persia, as it was known then, were very, very strong. And I think now even more recently, that was one of the planks of India's foreign policy, was to, strengthen its relations with Iran. Chabahar port being one of those things, but and then of course you've got all your guest workers in the Gulf states and all of that. So it's just that the situation is so fluid. Maybe keeping a bit quieter, toning down the rhetoric is maybe a good thing. I would say probably now, but time will tell, and things are moving so fast.
Okay. So thank you so much for joining us, John. It was wonderful speaking to you, and thank you for being so open about everything.
That's okay.
So thank you once again, and here's a little something from our sponsors, Prodigy Pro.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh, lovely. Oh, thank you very much.
It was wonderful talking to you.
Lovely to talk to you too.
That was all for today. Stay tuned for more such episodes. Until then, like, share and subscribe to our channel.